You ever toured the Martin Guitar Factory in Nazareth?
I have not.
It's well worth it.
It's
really amazing.
I think if I go in there, I'm going to be too tempted to spend
Well,
a few $100s.
You don't want to leave.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't own a Martin, but I think
No,
if I did.
I owned a Martin once, but I like Gibson's better actually. But you know, the band song I pulled into Nazareth, that's not the Middle East, that's Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
Right. The thing is, when you play guitar, you got to own a bunch of them, you know, because only
it's
certain
like
instruments
having affairs.
Right.
You know.
Exactly. Well, anyway, folks, my name is Dave Emmi, and I'm an author from Philadelphia, and it's an honor for me to be here at the Pottsville Public Library, speaking to you guys about my latest book called Divine Philly: Philadelphia's Vital Role in Christian America. And why don't I explain how I really got prompted to write this book, because it has also to do with Pottsville, this area. Yeah, there's a direct nexus to Pottsville, and it's a tight one. What happened was, a few years ago, I was going to school in Villanova, and I was born in upstate New York, so I was traveling back up to upstate New York just to visit family and friends, and a friend of mine in Villanova had said, you should stop into this town called Heckshersville, Pennsylvania. Which really from here, I think it's about 10 miles or so, right? You got Minersville, it's about 10 miles from here into the mining region. He said there's this old church that was built by the Irish miners. That's a very historic church, and they're closing it on this weekend. So you're not going to be able to get into it again. You might want to see this historic building before it closes. So I'm traveling on my way up to upstate New York, and Yingling Brewery is here in Pottsville, so I thought, okay, I'll pull into Yingling and buy some paraphernalia and get a case of lager or something, and then I'll stop on over into Heckshersville and check out this church. So I went into Heckshersville, and this was in June of 2008, and it was a very hot day. It was like 95 degrees, very oppressively hot. So I was really trying to find this place. It was a small mining community. Like, the population of Heckshersville now is under 100 people. So what had happened was the Catholic Church in the diocese was consolidating churches where their demographics weren't supporting the a congregation there any longer. So they were consolidating, and that was one church that was slated for closure. So I really wasn't paying attention too much about my surroundings or anything. I wanted to find a place. I'm looking for roads, and so I found the place. And when I entered into the church and I saw it, I was really taken aback about how beautiful the building was and the location. It is a stone church built like on top of a mountain, overlooking the rest of this, what they call the Irish Valley. And Heckshersville was an area where a lot of Irish immigrants came and migrated, especially after the potato famine, and they worked in the mines. And the life in the mines, I'll get into in a second, was cruel. It was a hard way to make a living. And when a church was built at that point in time, the church just wasn't a place where you went for Sunday worship. It was also the VFW post and the local meeting establishment. You met your wife at the church, and the family. It was kind of the social gathering place. And it turned out to be that this church was, a legend had it, John Newman's favorite church, which I had no idea. And if you don't know who John Newman is the first canonized saint in U.S. history. In a way, John Newman is kind of like the George Washington of Catholicism, in a way, in North America. He kind of, didn't invent it or anything, but he really established the toehold for Catholicism that spread across the rest of the United States. And today, Catholicism is the largest religious denomination in the U.S. About 1/3 of all U.S. citizens are Catholic. And a lot of it, I don't say is owed to John Newman, but the Philadelphia diocese, after the Civil War, was the largest Catholic diocese in the United States. And John Newman established and made the diocesan system of education that was all modeled on Newman's model that he established. So everything from Notre Dame to Villanova to Fordham to all these Catholic schools are really designed around the model that Newman made. And Newman was the bishop of the Philadelphia diocese for a little over 8 years. And in that time period, he established 70 churches. And one of them was this church in Hectorsville for the Irish miners. And when I went there, like I said, I was really taken aback at how beautiful the church was. It was really colorful inside. My dad was Italian, so I spent some time in Italy. And, you know, the Italian churches, if you've been there before, they're very, you know, I don't want to say we're gaudy, but, you know, they're over the top. Elaborate, that's the word I'm looking for. They're very elaborate. And this church wasn't that way. It was very modest, but colorful. And it was just a beautiful church, and they had there's a sign to John Newman out in front saying, "This is Newman's land," and there was a statue to him, and there were murals, colorful murals painted with John Newman, and a letter that he had made. So the nexus to Newman, who's, you know, really the, I don't say founder, but the person who established Catholicism in the United States in large measure, is a very strong nexus to that. And, you know, I was just taken by how beautiful the church was. Well, on that final day, people started to come in from all around. And it turned out to be, the place was packed. There was standing room only in it. And it was a funny feeling, because people saw people who they hadn't seen for, you know, years. And it was like, hey, great seeing you again. And there was also a Catholic Mass, and any kind of Mass, you know, you have a shared faith. There's an idea of the brotherhood of mankind and a benevolence for something larger than yourself. But at the same time, the church is getting closed. And in the book I wrote, I felt like I was getting served a 4-course meal, you know, a gourmet 4-course meal on board the Titanic. You know, it was this bittersweet kind of feeling. And during the Mass, you know, there were a lot of women in front of me, some, you know, elderly senior citizens who were crying and weeping because their mothers had worshipped in the church, and their grandmothers, and they were buried out in the church courtyard, and it was very emotional. And I didn't realize that the Catholic Church has a Mass for the closing of a church. You know, just like they have a wedding Mass or a baptism Mass, they have a closing of the church Mass, which, you know, I really didn't know about. And, you know, there's a certain liturgy that's read, and what happens is the congregation all leaves, and the last person to leave is the priest, who closes the door, and Mass is closed outside of the church. And then the following week, Mass is started at the neighboring church outside to connotate it's a congregation moving from one area to another. It's not a building. You know, that's what the church is trying to sell. But the other thing that, you know, really struck me was that, you know, the miners built this church. The Catholic, you know, the Catholic diocese didn't build it. The people who lived there, the Irish people, built it. And it was just a modest, colorful thing, and it looked like something that could be managed, that it didn't have to close. Certainly the congregations have moved, and there isn't a congregation that could support it, but historians and local preservation societies wanted to keep it open for special occasions like the Irish festival that's there, or maybe a retreat for priests, or, you know, have some type of function. It was just too beautiful, and you know, I have it in the book if you want to thumb through it. There's pictures, you can see how colorful it is. But if you want to take a look at some of it. So that's how and what happened is I started to research the situation. Being at Villanova has a special collections department for Irish history that is really kind of second to none. So they had great resources there. And I also went to the Archdiocese in Philadelphia, and I researched some of their records, and I found some compelling information. And because I'm in Pottsville right now, I want to try to get to the Pottsville part of the story, but there's a big part of the story in Philadelphia, because the Philadelphia Diocese, this was all part of the Philadelphia Diocese, and the strings were being pulled there in Philadelphia. You know, Newman was the bishop, and his successor was Frederick Wood, and they had input to all this area. They were integrally involved with it. But one of the parts of this story has to do with these Irish miners, because, you know, Hectorsville was a mining town, and that whole anthracite region. I bought a piece of anthracite. This is anthracite coal. And, you know, back after the Civil War, coal was kind of like what oil is today. Coal was back then. And anthracite is the highest valued type of coal. It has the least amount of impurities, and so the Pennsylvania coal mines had a big part of driving this industrial revolution. Because of this, they called it black diamonds, you know, because it was kind of shiny and it looks like this. And what happened was these Protestant people owned the lands and the railroad. And a famous guy who lived here was Frank Gowen. Frank Gowen owned the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he owned a lot of the anthracite. Here's a piece of anthracite. I'll tell you. Coal in your stocking for Christmas. But anyway, Frank Gowen, who lived here, owned a lot of the coal mines, and he also owned the railroads. And what happened back in those days was there was no protection for laborers. They had children working as breaker boys at 10 years old, and they'd get whipped on the back if they didn't, you know, separate the shale from the coal. And
cut your fingers horribly.
yeah, it was. There were certain accidents where over 100 people died in a coal mining accident. And what happened was these Irish laborers pushed back against the mine owners. And over a 20-year period, they killed about a dozen or 15 mine owners or mine bosses in what they would call retributive justice. You know, it was kind of like, hey, we're dying down in the mines, you're going to get a little taste of what we have to put up with. And what happened was that Frank Gowen and the mine owners hired their own police force, the coal mining police force. They employed them all. And these guys rounded up these Irish people who were suspected of being Molly Maguires, and they hung them. 20 Irish miners were hung between 1877 and 1879, and 9 of those were hung here in Pottsville, up on the hill here in that courtyard. And they're called the Molly Maguires, and they have a reputation. There's a movie with Sean Connery. You know, I don't want to get into the whole Molly Maguire thing. But what was that?
How many were killed in Jim Thorpe? 9 out of 20 were here?
9 were here. Jim Thorpe, originally 4 were killed on the were hung on the first day, and then 3 others, 7 were hung in total in Jim Thorpe. And you know, here in Pottsville, and I don't get into this much detail in the book about the people who were hung here, but originally the first day, they called it Black Thursday, it was 1877, and 10 miners were hung at once. And those 20 miners hung over that 24-month time period is still the largest mass execution in U.S. history. You know, where the U.S. government is putting to death people, executing them 21 times. Still today is that. And it's really kind of seen as the low point in Pennsylvania jurisprudence, because the police were hired by the mine owners, they were prosecuted, the juries had no Irish Catholics in the jury at all. Some of them even didn't even speak English. You know, it was kind of a rigged kind of process. And, you know, having these guys hung, they were really defending their livelihoods. They were dying in these mines. And so it was really kind of the beginning of organized labor is really what happened. And eventually, after these guys were hung, a few years later, the mining union was formed that stuck, and the miners' union turned out to be the largest union come around 1900 that was around. But this was really kind of the start of it. But on the power scale, the Irish miners didn't have the power to stand up to the union, to the mine owners and the railroads. It was just an imbalance, and they kind of rounded them up and hung them. Here in Pottsville, what happened, there was a man by the name of Benjamin Yost, who was a policeman, and they killed a policeman. And when you kill a policeman, that's kind of a, you know, a big deal. And so they rounded up these guys, and the murder of Benjamin Yost really kind of accelerated rounding up these guys. And the first 6 that were hung here in Pottsville, 5 of them were related to the Benjamin Yost murder. That's what they were charged with. Of the 20, I think some of them were guilty. You know, I think some of them certainly were not. Some were hung and were not. And the other thing about here in Pottsville that's very noteworthy is the head of the Molly Maguires, a guy by the name of Jack Kehoe, was also hung here. And Jack Kehoe, he was the head of AOH, the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And it was kind of like if you didn't get the head of this, if you didn't cut off the head of it, you failed. It was just going to come up again. So they had to kind of get Kehoe, and Kehoe was charged for a murder that happened 20 years earlier, and that was a really rigged. I don't think Kehoe was guilty of what he was charged with. He might have been guilty for other conspiracies, but what he was charged with, I don't think he, was killed there. So Pottsville has a storied history that the head of the Molly Maguires was hung here, and then also, 9 other ones were hung here. Also, Frank Gowan lived here. He was the guy who ran the railroads. And in the book, I write the book in it's not a dry academic read. I write it in a wider kind of way. And there's good guys and bad guys. One of the bad guys is Frank Gowan, who's this ambitious capitalist who's a bigger, faster, more guy who buys all these other railroads, buys all the mines, and he's a pretty ruthless guy. He's one of the bad guys. The good guys was John Newman. John Newman built that church in Heckshersville, and another bad guy is Newman's successor. And there's something in the book that I want to read from. Okay, there's a few things. I don't want to make this book sound like it's a ranking on Catholicism. It isn't. I was born into the Roman Catholic faith, and I went to Catholic school until 8th grade, and then I also went to Villanova University, and a lot of, my core value systems were developed underneath a Catholic theology, and I feel indebted to it, and I feel kind of lucky that, I was exposed to that. You learn some things that, I take through the rest of my life. Also, the Catholic Church today is the largest charitable organization in the world. So, there's Catholic charities, they do an awful lot. So I don't want to sit here throwing, mud on the Catholic Church. That said, what happened was these mine owners were in cahoots with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. They were paying the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. They were getting money from mine owners. And what Newman's successor did, Archbishop Wood, he denounced all secret societies. He said if anybody belonged to the Molly Maguires or AOH, and AOH is the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which is still around today. It's kind of like the Sons of Italy or the German Society of Pennsylvania. It's a benevolent kind of organization. But Wood said throughout the diocese, which includes this area, and anybody who was part of a secret society was going to be charged with excommunication. They were going to be kicked out of the church. You were not going to find a place to get married, baptized, whatever. So what Wood didn't like about secret societies is you had to take an oath to be part of the secret society. And the Catholic Church wanted to say, we are the primary authority in this region, not AOH, not the Molly Maguires. So they wanted to quash any kind of, gathering where people would, not use the Catholic Church as the primary authority. So he had an interest, and then at the same time, the mine owners were paying him to quash it. So, the Irish miners didn't really have a prayer. They were up against the power scale was, and if you go in that region, and we are in the mining region, the Molly Maguires are kind of thought of as heroes. They're thought of as labor heroes who stood up for their families and stood up against oppression. And when I dug into it and I did the research, it was a sad thing. It was a sad story. There was one, and I hope I can find it here quickly. There was one thing that really struck me. Here it is. I found letters that were written by some of these local priests to the Archdiocese. And what the Archdiocese had an interest in breaking the Molly Maguires and breaking AOH, because really AOH and Molly Maguires, that was a union. It was organized labor. They had the workers, the WBA, the mining union, but all of them belonged to AOH. So they wanted to break it. And I found this letter. One of the Mollies that was hung in Mao Chunk, his name was Doyle, Michael Doyle. And Michael Doyle is being convicted. He's going to be hung. And this letter by this local priest is saying, listen, Doyle is going to be hung on a Thursday. isn't this a good chance to kind of, and his family wants to find a place where to be buried. You know, what should I do? Can we bury him in our courtyard? He's denounced as a murderer, as a terrorist. Are we going to, isn't this a good chance to try to get more information out of him, to denounce AOH? Can't we get more of a confession out of him? This is the letter specifically. It says, Doyle, that's Michael Doyle, will be executed at Mao Chunk on Thursday. His friends wish to bury him in our cemetery. What must I do? Some priests and bishops feel that he should be compelled to make reparation by a public avowal, opposure of the AOH. Bishop Ryan was here and spoke to me of the necessity of such a confession. Your obedient servant, Daniel McDermott. That's the priest in that mining region. So rather than really having a heart with this guy who's going to be hung, I can't imagine knowing that you're going to die in 2 days. You know, you're in a cell, you hear the gallows being built, you know a rope's going to be around your neck. How are you going to sleep those 2 days? This guy's really not concerned about Michael Doyle. You know, he's really not concerned about his family, who's probably, you know, beyond consolation. He's concerned about, isn't this a good chance to kind of get some more information out of him so we could break AOH, you know? And that's a priest. You know, further on, this is another priest in the area whose name was, where is he? Anyway, Shanahan. Shanahan says, Dear Archbishop, I am glad to receive to you a list of outrages perpetrated by the Molly Maguires in the coal regions. I see the Hibernians elsewhere are doing their best to disavow connections to the Molly Maguires. I wish it was feasible to obtain either from Kerrigan, who was another person who was convicted. Kerrigan turned state's evidence and, you know, started to squeal on, you know, the other ones. We can get more information from Kerrigan, who has already made a confession, or from some others, a fuller statement in some way identifying the ancient order of Hibernians with the Molly Maguires in such a way that a mere denial on their part would not be sufficient. Many I know distrust Kerrigan's statement. So in other words, this guy's trying to say, can't we get some information out of Kerrigan to link the Mollies to AOH so we can break AOH at the same time? That's what the priests are doing in the mining region. And, you know, when I saw some of these letters, I just walked away. It was just, if you think about a priest, he's trying, they should be defending their congregations, not defending their hierarchy. But I really, the other thing I say is a lot of the stuff that happened there in the coal mining regions, it's happening again today, and it has happened. You know, as far as the Catholic Church goes, the sex abuse charges, what they did, they protected their own hierarchy rather than their congregation. And if this information was kind of known more publicly before those sex charges, you know, happened, maybe something could have happened to quell it a little bit. You know, so the book is a balanced book. You know, it's not rah-rah Catholic, it's not anti. You know, there's about John Newman in here, who was an astounding individual too. So I could go on and on about the book, but basically it's written in those kinds of ways. That's generally it. You know, I talk about how it relates to what's going on today. You know, this time period is really, it's called the Gilded Age. You know, where people, the top 1%, the Gowans, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, had multiple mansions around the world, and mistresses, and enormous tons of wealth, and immigrants were getting off the boats with $2 in their pocket, down in the mines, really wanting to put a meal on the table for their family, and really couldn't do it. They were dying in the mines, while these other people were just, you know, the imbalance, the inequity was. And we're kind of, in my opinion, we're in a new Gilded Age today. We're in, you know, there's just immigrants that are coming in, whether they're from South America now, and they have no protections. I don't know a family here around that I know that doesn't have somebody up against it and suffering, that's, you know, looking at serious financial difficulties, and a lot of this already happened. You know, it already happened, and if we could kind of. This is kind of what happened in the mines is a microcosm of what's going on today, and I kind of summarize it like that at the end of the book. So that's what. And the other thing is, Pope Francis is coming to Philadelphia in a year from now, in September 25th. He's coming to Philadelphia. So I thought it would be a good time to kind of get this back out It kind of tells the story of Catholicism, the good and the bad, you know, with a balance. And I thought, you know, might get an audience with, they're expecting over 2 million people
Yeah,
to
I
come
see
in,
that.
you know,
It's
so
supposed to be a record.
maybe I'll sell a few.
On Ben Franklin Parkway.
You know, that's what I'm trying to do, is trying to get the word out. But the thing about the Hectorsville Church, and I'm going to summarize. First of all, if there's any questions on answer them, and then I just might play something that relates to it, you know, because I haven't somebody talk to you for a while. But the church in Hectorsville, in my understanding, is still standing there. They cleaned out a lot of it. I haven't been in it since that day I've been there. Some of it, I don't think they can clean out. The paintings, the murals on the walls are...
They can.
They took the murals down too?
They,
Already?
just last week.
They didn't go to a museum or anything, did they?
No,
They were destroyed.
They put them in storage.
Put them in storage, right? There were a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful place. I mean, I'm from New York, and I'm not Irish, you know. My dad was Italian, my mom's Swedish, you know. So I'm like, I don't have blood or a dog in the hunt. But being there, I can say like, wow, this is something that needs to be retained. I mean, it's a Newman connection, and it's beautiful. Whether it's a retreat, whether it's, I mean, if you saw it, if you guys have been there, it's kind of heartbreaking that it's going to be closed. It's just, I don't know, over fiscal reasons that, you know, yeah, the Catholic Church has enough money in their coffers to turn that around and to make it happen. So, if there's a question or two, field it. If you want to know anything else about the book, I could go in detail about Newman, about the wood, about the Miley McGuires. There's information in here. Whenever I do these historical narratives, I try not to just regurgitate stuff that's already been done and reword it. I have to find out new scholarship that advances it for me to dive into it. And there's new scholarship about the Miley McGuires, you know, about Archbishop Wood, about Newman. There's new information in here that, you know, hasn't been published. And it's about 180 pages, and 35 are pictures, and you can see what the church looked like. You know, you can see it's a beautiful thing. And it's, I don't know, I hope that the tide turns with that somehow, and maybe I'm a little too late coming to it. I don't know, but so are there any questions or anything about that? Or
I lived there all my life, and I gotta get out and see there because I never was been there.
No, really.
it's really not that far
All
from
my
here.
friends,
You
I
know,
worked at
you
Honeywell,
go to
so I know a
Minersville.
lot of guys from
I was there once, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I heard about Hectorsville and Buffalo. Now all you hear is coming down the
Well,
mountain,
higher,
trucking
yeah,
up here.
well,
So-
higher,
Yeah.
I mean, it's related
But the
to
Catholic, they come in
the
from
Irish
offices
up there.
or something.
Oh,
what they
they
use.
could have
Oh.
had.
Like you
big
said,
thing.
preserve. I can't
It
think of
happens.
mules and stuff.
oh, I know they have an Irish festival there. You
No,
know,
they
but,
stopped, we had to stop there.
Your
Oh.
flat pick fell.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
heritage
There's a
day.
Heritage Day in June.
Dave, how much is your book?
$20. 20.
All right. Well, huh?
Well, I don't know if I can get this out here, but if you hear, okay, excuse the tuning. Okay. A lot of this story has to do with nativists who've been here already, with immigrants. You know, it's native immigrants. It's Protestant Catholic. It's capital labor. It's, you know, the fights that have really kind of, I don't know, defined America in some degree. But in the haves and haves not, you know, it's really kind of what that was about. And anyway, this song is about that, and I think we're facing more of that, you know, and we have to, I don't know, as I said, what happened in the Irish mines is happening again today, and we have to rally. That's what this is about. So. With a mountain in your step, in search of El Dorado, but you haven't found it yet. Or you might be an old man with your whole life at your back, but you can hear eternity whispering down the track. Or maybe you're a woman, but just about to be. You can feel the generations swimming in your sea. We all know it's coming, certain as the dawn. The battle for the future now. Which side are you on? So come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Come on along. Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Which side are you on? Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. The battle lines are drawn. Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Which side are you? Which side are you on? There's a restlessness out in the street, and questions fill the air. How long will the stuff go on? Will our country still be here? People know the game is rigged, even as they play. You see their hopes and aspirations slowly slip away. So come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Come on along. Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Which side are you on? Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. The battle lines are drawn. Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Which side are you? Which side are you on? Well, maybe you're in Pottsville or Philly. Maybe you're down south in Georgia or Tennessee. People all around the USA are finding the strength to see the changes we must bring about and what this world can be. It's in the things you hope for, it's in the things you need, it's in the things you do each day, it's in your every deed. So come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Which side are you on? Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. The battle lines are drawn. Come on, come on, come on, if you're coming. Which side are you? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? All right, folks, so once again, the book, Divine Philadelphia's Vital Role in Christian America, great holiday gift. So, anyway, thanks for coming. I hope you guys get a chance to go up to the church and come down to Philly. You know, that's really kind of where all the strings were pulled with all this.
And where do you live?
I live near the Art Museum in Philadelphia.
Wow,
Yeah, so
Oh,
yeah.
which church, I came in late, I'm sorry, which church was that you're mentioning?
Well, the Basilica of St. Peter's and Paul, there in Logan Square, is where the Pope is going to have his Mass. There, right there on the Parkway. There's going to be over 2 million people coming into Philadelphia, and the Basilica was kind of a. And this is a whole nother.
Oh, no.
Sorry, it's just a bit. Well, it's just a head
You
tumor.
lost the tuning peg.
I'm okay. Yeah.
Part of the book is about St. Peter's.
I'm okay. It's just a tumor. I'll be all right with it. The Basilica of St. Peter's and Paul was really kind of it was designed around St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And in some ways it's kind of like the Vatican of the United States. And, you know, there's a Protestant slant, you know, let me tell you about the Protestant view and I'll tell you about the Catholic view. Protestantism in the old world, when Martin Luther started, Catholicism was all around. All of Western Europe was Catholic. England was Catholic. Germany was Catholic. But when Martin Luther started his Reformation, there was a war, the 30-Year War, and so there was this idea that in the old world, there's always going to be a conflict. There's going to be the old entrenched papists, they call them, with the new Reformed, enlightened Reformation, Protestant. So what God did in His wisdom, this was, back what they sell people, was, God gave the Protestants a new world. The new world, to have a manifest destiny. This is what this North America was about, was what God gave Protestantism, you know. And incoming Irish Catholics didn't really fit well into this idea of this manifest destiny, not to mention the Native Americans or anything else, but, you know, that was what was kind of sold. Like, this land was for Protestantism. And I mean, you still see the vestiges of it today. There's 1/3 of the Americans today are Catholic. There's been one Catholic president, and he was assassinated in office. You know, you kind of see that there's still vestiges of that here. But getting back to the basilica, when they made this basilica, what Catholics have with a rub on the Protestants is they're saying, a church isn't a building. It isn't a pope. It's a congregation of people. And the first church were the apostles. That was the first church. And the first pope is Peter. You know, you are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and the kings of the kingdom are, you know, that's in the Bible. It's Peter's the first pope. And if you go to Rome, you'll see the list of the popes. It's Peter and Paul. And so Catholics against Protestants say, you know, you guys are, you know, L. Ron Hubbard, or so you're a bogus, you're not the real thing. We're the real thing that started with Peter and Paul. And that's why it's called the Basilica of St. Peter's and Paul in Philadelphia, because it was a Protestant commonwealth, and they're saying to the Protestants, this is the real thing, and it's not that, you know, so I mean, that's kind of the conflict that was going on, you know, and that's covered in the book too. But the Basilica is where the Pope is going to be. He's going to go visit Newman, I'm sure. He's the first canonized saint, you know, so he'll go down and see Newman. I'm sure that's going to be a part of his, you know, itinerary. So, but that was all played out in the mining regions, and, you know, thanks for coming. I got plenty of books here. It's a good read. I think it's a story that you'll enjoy, so, okay. All right. Oh, thank you, my friend.
Oh, before you leave, you were talking about a list of the popes, and the encyclopedia, if ever a decent one, has a list in there from the beginning up of every pope.
Oh, right.
That they know about, anyhow.
Yeah, it starts with Simon Peter, and then it's Paul with the 2 apostles, and then, you know, that's still used today. Kind of, so the Catholics kind of, but, you know, I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong. I'm saying that fight happened in, you know, the Pennsylvania coal mines.
All right, want to sign it somewhere?
Oh, yeah, I'll sign it for you for sure. Okay. Let me just put this guitar away.
It's kind of strange, the Basilica.
Yeah, I can
Peter and
replace
Paul,
that.
because
That's
Peter
not,
and Paul were
you
not
know,
really friendly.
that's an easy
with
job.
each other.
It's
They both had
occupational
different
hazard
ideas
in
about what-
Exactly, you're trying to do too much at once, right?
Usually my finger picks go
And then
funny.
it
Well,
took them a
yeah,
long time, but I was never in the
Okay, probably should pay a little more attention.
I don't know why.
Have a little wax on it, too, if you- If I get near the pope, I'll have to see you too, then.
I just want to turn off my recorder here. Hold on.
Okay, I just had my